think I better put in my other little assist pod. We do not want to miss any of this story, do we? Oh, Sandy, the Sandman. When we left off, we left Catherine imprisoned, Pitch set to deceive his own daughter, Mother Nature. And now let us see how the story unfolds. Chapter 4. Genies and Jests. It had been a long day for everyone in Santa Claus, and unpacking is always wearying, even when using magic. Without the robot genie, however, it would have been exhausting. The genie had been particularly useful when North had summoned it to unload the train. The genie's strength was almost unlimited. Genie, Jinn. So it would have been able to carry many dozens of large bundles and to give every child in the village a piggyback ride at the same time. Thanks, Genie, called out the youngest William as the metal robot dropped all the Williams and their belongings at their house. It was my pleasure, said the genie in its usual way, crisp and exact, and with a chime-like quality as though it were a talking music box. It was my pleasure, something like that. North, Umbric, Toothiana, and Bunnymun were busy settling into the comforting hollow of Big Root. The interior of the gigantic tree was tidier than they had left it. While they had been gone, the owls had organized the insects and squirrels into a very efficient cleaning brigade. North, Ombrick, and Bunnymun were scouring the library's newly constituted volumes for any hints that could lead them to Mother Nature's whereabouts, while Toothiana, who also spoke fluent owl, quizzed the wise birds on many points of mutual interest. They were desperate to begin their attempt to rescue Catherine. From the very beginning, the guardians had the ability to feel the thoughts and emotions of one another when needed. If one guardian was in the next room or on the other side of the globe from the others, a call for help could be sensed. But that made it all the more strange that they had heard nothing from Catherine. And they were deeply alarmed that the woman who had taken both Catherine and Pitch was, in fact, Pitch's daughter. Though this Mother Nature clearly possessed enormous power, the guardians had no clue as to how she had acquired it. They weren't even certain of the extent of her powers, or whether she was good, evil, or both. North was particularly frustrated and echoed all their thoughts. We know more about making chocolate milk than we do about Pitch's daughter and how she came to be this so-called Mother Nature, or Nature Mother, or Mother Nature. We're supposed to be the wisest men on the... Bunnymun felt obliged to interrupt his friend. The two of you are indeed men, and you possess an impressive amount of knowledge for humans of your generations. But my dear North, I must remind you that I am a puka and not a man. Sometimes Bunnymun's precise and exact nature could be inadvertently funny or inadvertently irritating. Often at the same time, North looked at the enormous rabbit who stood even taller than himself. He poked a single finger at one of Bunnymun's impressively large ears. Holy smoke, you're right. I've never noticed your ears. Bunnymun blinked twice. One ear twitched slightly, as did his nose. Really? You never noticed my ears? Oh, I understand, he responded. That was an example of the peculiar human method of communication known as sarcasm. Or joke, North smirched. Someday I'll make you laugh, Bunnymun. Me? Laugh? The rabbit looked particularly baffled. That would be historic. Pukas don't laugh. North grinned. No kidding. Actually, no, I mean, yes. Well, either way, I'm not, as you say, kidding. Pukas never laugh, as far as I know, and have difficulty in kidding. I know, said North. Then why did you say it? Oh, you were restating an obvious fact to underscore your perception that I needn't have stated the fact in the first place. In other words, you were again being sarcastic or making a joke. Nope, North said, I was just kidding. The rabbit's ears, nose, and whiskers were now twitching like mad. That doesn't entirely make sense. Really? Asked North. Are you kidding? No, I mean, yes, wait, yes, to the first question, and no, to the second. But are you kidding or joking with me? Neither, said North. He was deeply pleased. He had finally discovered a way to confound the brilliant rabbit. I was just being silly. Look, said Bunnyman, twitching all over. I have tried to embrace this thing you call humor, but I do not see the difference between kidding and joking and being silly. Or jesting, North said. That, well, it's, or making a quip? No, I mean, how about a wisecrack? A crack? In something solid? How can that have wisdom? Asked the rabbit. It can't. It just needs to tickle your funny bone, North said, smiling. The rabbit, however, was panting with frustration. What are you talking about? There's no such bone in any known creature. Humor is a mental activity. It has nothing to do with the skeletal system. To claim so is complete nonsense. Exactly, bellowed North. Holmbrick had been deliberately ignoring his two comrades. He was buried in one of Bunnyman's egg-shaped books. Holmbrick was astounded. The rabbit had vast records of all the natural occurrences of the earth. This wasn't unexpected. He was a creature attuned to nature, more so than any human. But it was how his books were written that was so surprising, and the highly technical phrasing that was typical to Pukin literature. The Earth was usually described as the planetoidal orb. Earthquakes were referred to as high-volume terra firma displacement events, and so on. Midway through the chapter titled Peculiar Interstellar Phenomena from the Dawn of Time Till Last Tuesday, Holmbrick found something described as an extraterrestrial solid matter of some interest hurtled through the atmosphere and into a large body of oceanic fluids in the southern Pan-Pacific region in the 2 millionth equinox cycle. In other words, a meteor or a shooting star had crashed somewhere in the Pacific Ocean sometime near the end of the Golden Age. Holmbrick was startled to discover that soon after this event, the weather on Earth changed profoundly. Before, there had been almost no storms of any kind, but since this meteor had arrived, nature had become far more dramatic, unpredictable. Is this the beginning of Mother Nature? Has Pitch's daughter come to be here on a shooting star? Wondered Holmbrick. At that instant, Nightlight flew through one of the big roof knothole windows. As the guardian who was most deeply connected to Catherine, Nightlight always knew before any of them if she was in trouble or not. Now the poor boy looked stricken. A sudden, terrible dread came to them all. They felt certain that Catherine was in grave peril. The owls began to hoot. Toothiana's feathers stood on end. Grandpa's voice is a little hoarse this time around. Might have to take a rest after the next chapter, which is chapter 5, Grab a Tear, Save a story. The night was oppressively dark. The stars themselves seemed to shrink. Nestled into the upper branches of Big Root was Catherine's treehouse. Though it was empty of Catherine, it was not exactly empty. Eyelash, now fully grown, sat dejectedly in an impressively large nest, which also served as the treehouse's roof. Being full grown meant Eyelash was considerably larger than other species of geese. She was quite large even for her own breed. Her wingspan was roughly 45 feet. Let's see, 3 into 45 goes 15 yards. That's pretty big. And even while sitting in her nest, she was taller than any man, but her nature was gentle and her emotions still childlike. She was heartbroken over Catherine's disappearance and could barely raise her long neck to respond to the kind attention of the village children who had snuck away from their own beds to comfort her. Petter and his sister Sasha, the brothers William, and even Fogg, who was usually too sleepy for such late night adventures, were there. They petted Kailash, smoothed her feathers, and tried to convince her to eat. But the giant goose would only make a sad peeping sound. Petter, who had a fine sense of how to cheer everyone up, suggested that Mr. QWERTY tell one of Catherine's stories. He opened himself to read one of Catherine's earlier tales, but his voice cracked and faltered. Tears filled his eyes and spread slowly down the handsome leather binding of his book spine. None of the children had ever seen a book actually cry, which was not surprising, as there had never been a book that was able to. But the tears that fell from the page to the soft leaves around Kailash's nest surprised them further. Each tear had inside it a letter or a question mark or some other form of punctuation. It was Sasha who understood the ramifications of this. That's Catherine's handwriting. Please don't cry, Mr. QWERTY. You're crying out Catherine's stories. But this caused the poor book to sob even harder. Tears and letters began to spill out at an alarming rate. If this continued, all of Catherine's stories would be drained away. The children became desperate, and Kailash also began to weep. They reached out to comfort the goose, then turned at the sound of something landing on the far side of the nest. Nightlight was back. He had been with them earlier and had not seemed like himself at all. He was moody, dark, and almost afraid. Then he had left hurriedly, but now he was like the nightlight of old. He flashed and flickered and grabbed at every fallen tear. Nightlight had amazing abilities with tears. The children had seen this before. He'd once taken their tears and used them to repair his broken diamond dagger that could cut through any armor. But these tears were different. He cradled them in his hands with extraordinary tenderness, as though he held the most delicate treasure. These were Catherine's words and thoughts. This was a treasure that must never be lost. He tucked the wordy tears into his pocket. Then he looked from the children to Kailash's poor Mr. QWERTY, who thankfully had stopped his sobs. What hope could he offer them? He knew Catherine was in terrifying peril, and he had no idea how to help. How could he possibly comfort his friends, Catherine's friends? He felt himself dimming again. Nightlight felt himself dimming again. Now they'd see for themselves his own desperation. But Nightlight was a creature of light, and he could shine or feel more in a shadow than any other being. So, of course, he was the first to see, in the evening shade of Big Root, a light in the sky coming toward them, a sort of lustrous, radiant cloud. He could feel his hope returning, and he brightened, leaning toward the light. The others turned to see what he was looking at. One by one, they cried out as they began to see the cloud unlike any they'd ever seen. one that left them feeling that hope can sometimes travel in the darkest night. But I'll try and go a little further and finish chapter 6. The Sandman cometh. Moments earlier, North had been in mid-sentence when Nightlight had flown suddenly out the window. The boy was frantic to help Catherine, and North had been trying to calm him. For all his bravery and powers, Nightlight was not used to controlling his feelings, especially feelings like hurt and worry. He wanted to do something. He wanted to help Catherine right then. North was the closest to understanding what Nightlight was going through, for he had been almost as wild and carefree when he was a lad. Why, he'd lived as a wild child of the Russian forest, raised by Cossack bandits, which is almost the same as being raised by bears. But his attempts to ease Nightlight's anxiousness had lasted about 6 words before the boy vanished. Bunnymun sensed North's concern. In my observations, beings between childhood and adulthood are even more prone to confusing behavior than during any other of the confusing times that inflict most species, the Puka said. He wants to think he can figure everything out for himself, said North, eyeing the rabbit, a characteristic common in many species no matter their age, and he poked one of Bunnymun's ears. I don't know what you're trying to infer, North, said Bunnymun. I do not like to figure everything out. I simply always do. Before North could make a snappy response, he became keenly aware of an intense sensation of lightness around him. Not only was there an otherworldly glow to the air inside the tree, but gravity itself seemed to have less pull. They literally felt light on their feet. Someone casting spells? Asked Ombre, glancing all around at the others. A soothing sound enveloped them. Ombre hazarded a guess as to its origin. It's like the sound, it's like the falling sand from 1,000 hourglasses. Under normal circumstances, the orb at the tip of North's sword would have sent out some sort of alarm. But evidently, it found nothing to be alarmed about, even when the 3 guardians began to float from the floor, first a few inches, then higher and higher. The orb stayed silent. Graceful twists of gold and glowing sand ebbed up through the floorboards, pushing them gently but firmly out the giant knothole window and up toward Big Root's upper branches. As they floated ever higher, none of them oddly sensed they were in any danger. Rather, they felt incredibly calm, as though this unprecedented occurrence was simply the way things were somehow supposed to be. Which was equally odd. Were they all being drugged? Was this some new magic? If so, they sensed it wasn't a dark sword. As they approached the treetop, the whorls of sand seemed to be settling more at their feet. To their amazement, they could see that every other creature of Santa Clausen, human or otherwise, was also floating through the evening sky. Bear, Petrov, the horse, even the spirit of the forest, and Queen Tuthiana, they were all rising up and rotating around Big Root. When they all reached the top and were level with Catherine's treehouse, they saw Kailash surrounded by the children. Those in the nest were transfixed by something else. Just above them floated a rotund little man. He had wild, swirling golden hair, and he seemed to be glowing from within. Nightlight stood just below the little man, and as the villagers watched, he began to kneel as though the man were a king of some kind. The man seemed very friendly. His smile was radiant. It was a smile of total reassurance and gave all who saw it a feeling of intense well-being. not joy, but something akin to a sleepy peace, a sort of not a worry in the world sensation. None of them, not even the guardians, were able to do anything more than gaze at this gentle fellow. And though he did not speak, they felt as though they heard him say a single whispered phrase: "Time now for a dream, time, dream." Then, with a wave of his little hands, the sand began to spin around. It did not sting, nor did it get in their eyes. It felt rather like the tickling of a soft bed sheet. And everyone, right down to Bear, fell into a deep, restful sleep. But this was no ordinary sleep. They began to share an experience that seemed like a dream, for it was dreamlike. But every moment of it was amazing, and somehow they knew it was absolutely true. They felt they were being given a history in the very best way this friendly little man knew how, and they were certain to remember every detail for Mr. Qwerty, who was the only one not asleep. And they were certain to remember every detail for Mr. Qwerty, who was the only one not asleep, was recording the story of this dream experience on his pages. He knew Catherine would not mind. She loved a good story. This one might also help save her life, and here was how it began. To be continued soon.